That imbecile of a noble was a crucial element of this strategy. He was meant to start a revolution. In conjunction with the internal conflicts initiated by their grain shortage, the kingdom would then be forced to request aid from the Sorceress Kingdom. There were multiple ways to make use of the nobility, but they would all create a reason for the Sorceress Kingdom to intervene in the kingdom's affairs. This meant that to Ainz, everything was still going according to plan. The incident caused by that dimwit was more than enough justification for the Sorceress Kingdom to involve themselves. However, it appeared as though Albedo and Demiurge were a bit worried by the current situation. There had to be something that Ainz was missing. Now then, Albedo. Though I want to ask questions of a fundamental nature. Do we actually have evidence that noble caused the incident? Do we have clues that this was a ploy by the kingdom? I recall something about Albedo's scheduled correspondence with that noble we were supposed to get under our influences. Albedo had complained to Ainz time after time about having to send letters to that unpleasant noble, a mere human, or something similar. She had also requested Ainz to review said letters, so he had to read them on numerous occasions. If it was simple paperwork, Ainz would still know a bit about it, but he had no confidence in his ability to proofread it. He tried to avoid having to do so, but Albedo had begged him in earnest, so he had to. By the way, though much time had passed since he came to this world, Ainz still hadn't learned to read the language. The best he could do was write out his and Momon's names and recognize numbers. Compared to Albedo, Demiurge, and Pandora's actor, who understood the language of several countries, it was easy to see how their brains functioned on a completely different level than his. It was for this reason that Ainz had to rely on magical items to understand any texts. If he was being honest, he didn't think any edits would be necessary, so he just handed them back as is to Albedo. I've also seen the letters that noble had sent back in response, and frankly, it appears as though he was completely charmed by you. I did not think that he would be the type to oppose the Sorceress Kingdom. He had heard of a saying that betrayal from one's crush could lead one to become irrationally hateful. Like finding out the cute voice actor you stan had a boyfriend. As this thought came to mind, Ainz could see a reflection of his friend of yesteryear, crying tears of blood in Shaltier's place. He could also see in Aura in Mare's place, that friend's sister laughing at him. Yes, we've conducted detailed investigations into this matter. It is undeniably true that that man was the mastermind behind the grain robbery. But, the possibility that he could have been charmed, brainwashed, or controlled in any other way is certainly not zero. The only thing we could be sure of is that he had committed the crime. Perhaps this was a ploy by someone of an even higher intellect than us. If that was the case, then there is the possibility that they are somehow taking advantage of his actions. Albedo had a troubled expression, and so did Demiurge. What Ainz found unbelievable was the possibility that someone who could rival the intellect of these two would just show up out of the blue. Or rather, maybe that nobleman did what he did without thinking it through. If that was the case, then it would make a lot more sense to Ainz. Ainz-sama, I don't believe that's possible. Albedo said in a tone as if she were apologizing. This was the first time she had adopted such an attitude, and Ainz couldn't help but feel refreshed from this new kind of behavior. No, wait a second, Albedo. We are only able to make preemptive moves against the strategies of some genius, but Ainz-sama could even see through an idiot's rash actions. There's always the possibility that it could be the case, is there not? No, isn't that explanation the most plausible? But, to be that stupid, is it really possible? But Ainz-sama. If Ainz-sama said so, then isn't it the truth? Albedo. I guess so, I think. For some reason Aura and Mare had butted in back up Demiurge's argument, stunning Ainz who had simply muttered a throwaway comment. If that's the case. Albedo and Demiurge furrowed their brows and began to debate. Hold on a second. Let's hear the opinions of the other floor guardians regarding the operation. They must have quite a lot of questions, so let's set aside some time for that. Those of you with questions could just raise your hands, and Albedo or Demiurge will answer them. Please don't direct any questions at me. Ainz had put up a white flag in his mind already. I have a question, Aura said as she raised her hand. Why didn't we just draw in as many of the nobility as we could at the start of the operation? If we did that, we could just kill off that troublesome noble and continue the operation as we had planned, right? The one to answer this question was Demiurge. We had considered that during the planning phase, but ultimately chose to abandon that idea after deliberations. It would have been fine had we drawn an outstanding nobleman, but the nobles of the kingdom aren't exactly known for their intellect, now are they? With that in mind, the more people we drew into the fold, the more likely it was for an unexpected leak in intel to occur. That was why we had decided to focus on an individual and have them form and manage a new faction. Things were the way they were because they hadn't expected that person to be such a wild card. The next one to raise their hand was Cocytus. We could not make use of the exceptional nobles. It wasn't as though we couldn't. In fact, we had recruited someone like that already. It's so easy to blackmail a doting father. We had considered the fact that we would want to spare the noblemen who were at least somewhat capable, which was why we chose the expendable portion of the nobility. Don't you believe that it's necessary for us to clear out the moronic few, so that the country could become one worthy of being ruled over by Ainz-sama? That was why we formed a faction that was filled with people that were incompetent in various forms. As a metaphor, think of it as preparing a rubbish bin before throwing away trash. Of course, we had received intel on the talented people of the kingdom, but we wanted to also collect intel of our own directly from the source. Because the Sorcerer's Kingdom has no need for nobles other than a few of them who are either talented or hard-working ascetics. I have a question, Sheltier said as she raised her hand. I'm not sure I understand Arinsu. Even if that dolt of a nobleman was being manipulated into doing what he did his actions not constitute an attack against the Sorcerer's Kingdom? If so, shouldn't the Sorcerer's Kingdom use that as casus belli to invade the Kingdom Arinsu? If it really was a trap set by someone, could we not just crush them? That is correct, we should have done so, especially if there were no hidden masterminds. But, Albedo glanced at Demiurge, prompting him to answer, that's right. Demiurge then turned his gaze towards Ainz before looking towards the Guardians. It is extremely difficult to find the right balance in dealing with the situation. Though now that we have Ainz-sama's superior insight, we've come to understand that the nobleman had committed this act without putting much thought into it. If we were to lightly punish him for this transgression, the Sorcerer's Kingdom will be looked down upon by other nations. So, what do you all believe is the suitable punishment for someone who had attacked a caravan flying the Sorcerer's Kingdom's flag, something that essentially signified Ainz-sama himself, and had stained Ainz-sama's public image? We should kill him. Yeah, I think Wani-chan is correct. That's right. That's how it should be. Now then, I must ask you all. Do we simply let this slide after we have dealt with the criminal himself? That will not do. His master must also answer for this crime. Kakitas nodded his head in silence. Ainz had never been more shocked than he was at this moment. Though it was surprising that the Guardians would have such an overreaction, it wasn't too out of the ordinary considering their personalities. What Ainz was shocked about was how they had accepted his throwaway comment about the noble as the truth at face value. To be honest, it was quite scary. That's right, I also agree with Sheltier's judgment. For them to be dumb enough to make a fool out of Ainz-sama, I say we need to mete out appropriate punishments to the entire kingdom. But, back then, Ainz-sama once said that to rule over a ruined nation would be bad for our reputation. I've also heard that Ainz-sama has no interest in standing atop a pile of rubble, so we should try our best to avoid that kind of situation. Upon hearing what Demiurge had to say, Albedo nodded her head. Ainz had two questions in mind in response. First, has he ever said something like that before? If you surveyed 100 of Nazaryk's denizens on the question, who is correct, Ainz or Demiurge? Perhaps a majority, no, 99 of them would be certain that it was Ainz. Only a single person would be against that notion, and that person is Ainz-ulgaun. But how credible could he be as a person who couldn't even remember what had happened a week ago? Which was why, although Ainz had no recollections of this, since Demiurge had said so, he must have said something along those lines in the past. If that was the case, then there was only one correct way to approach this. As expected of you to have remembered what I had said. Demiurge, you've made me very happy. I remember too. I do too, Ainz-sama. Yumu. Sheltier, or, I'm thankful for you too. He couldn't figure out if they had actually remembered or had not, but were simply concurring with Demiurge, just like what he was doing. Speaking of which, how have they still not figured out the truth that he's incompetent? Was he really that good at acting? Much time had passed since he came to this world as the Overlord of Nazaryk. He had been operating as their Overlord this entire time. They should have seen through his Overlord disguise already. They should have seen through the useless nature of Sator by now. The conversation continued on as he agonized over this. So, in keeping with Ainz-sama's wishes, we will not be punishing the whole of the kingdom. However, we can't just let them get away with a light punishment. We will also have to put the plan on pause or abandon it entirely for now. At the very least, it will require major deviations. Ainz couldn't help but feel a great sense of guilt at the fact that his words held such prominence in their minds. So that was why. But Demiurge, did the plans really fail this time? Demiurge, Albedo, and their assistant in the kingdom, possessed an incomprehensible level of genius in Ainz's perspective. Would the plan that was the culmination of their minds truly fail? If that was the case, he must keep in mind what he says to them from this point onward. It would probably be best if he kept his mouth shut from now on. So, just in case, he asked again, are we really abandoning our plans? The candy and whip plan? Demiurge looked towards Ainz with a bewildered expression. He has seen this expression on numerous occasions. It was the expression he had made when he was trying to figure out the true meaning behind his words, as if they were all euphemisms set by a being on a completely different level of brilliance. Wrong. Demiurge. I'm just trying to reaffirm what you've said. There are no hidden layers of meanings. You should chill out by taking a bath first. These thoughts disappeared right as Ainz was about to give voice to them. Just as an unpleasant premonition surfaced in his mind, just as Ainz had expected, Demiurge stood aghast, as if he had just had a sudden realization. No wait, could it be? Ainz-sama. Could it be that you have had the same intention back when you immaculately brought the Empire under our dominion? His premonitions were right on the target. What is he saying? Ainz started ranting towards Demiurge in his mind. What kind of a thought process would lead you to that conclusion? No, that's not that case at all would be the best response, right? But would that response really be appropriate? That's right. After he vacillated for quite a long time, this was his reply. For some unknown reason, Albedo's eyes were opened as white as Demiurge's. It was it was extremely terrifying. I see, so that was why Ainz-sama had repeatedly instructed us to do so. Please forgive your subordinate for not realizing it immediately. I have disappointed my master. No, Demiurge. How could someone like you, no, how could people like us ever hope to be able to fully comprehend Ainz-sama's ingenious plans? To have forgotten that Ainz-sama's every move was made with a multitude of intents may have been our greatest failure. That's right. It's just as you have said. To have applied the candy and whip policy on a national level. As expected of our Ainz-sama. As expected of the leader of the supreme beings. Ainz laughed at himself. He could no longer understand what these two were talking about. In that moment, a thought flashed across his mind. What if these two had already realized Ainz's incompetence and were just trying to cover for him? They're both geniuses. The truth is, I can't even comprehend how much smarter they are than me. How long would people like them continue to mistake my stupidity for genius? No, that shouldn't have even been possible. Ainz-sama is truly the greatest mind of Nazarick. Exactly, you're completely correct, Cocytus. To Ainz-sama, someone who's capable of planning on the scale of millennia and myriad years into the future, something on the scale of a few years is nothing. Is that true? As expected of Ainz-sama. To be able to plan for millennia ahead, I'm truly in awe. Ainz-sama. What is Demiurge talking about? Who? When did they say that? How would someone be able to plan that far ahead into the future? Don't make stuff up on your own. Ainz suppressed his desire to yell out his thoughts. It would be bad if the two naive children took it as the truth. However, since he had been approving every single one of Demiurge's suggestions, he no longer knew the best way to respond to him now. Plus, if he was to object now, it would most likely create issues for him in the future. So I still have to act as usual. If Ainz was capable of facial expressions, he would probably have a dubious smile right now. After racking his brain, he managed to come up with a response that neither confirmed nor denied Demiurge's statement. There's no need for our master to be so humble, Arinsu. Oh great Ainz-sama. To be able to think this far out into the future. No, if that was not the case then he would not have been the leader of the supreme beings. He couldn't handle it any longer, he should just give up the facade. Ainz made his decision. Now then, since we now have Ainz-sama's permission, let's give unto the kingdom the most miserable of punishments. How did the word miserable show up in their conversation up to this point? Ainz was completely baffled. Albedo clasped her hands together and grinned brightly. The adorable Albedo and Demiurge spoke in unison. The Empire, who had surrendered immediately to Ainz-sama, had been given the candy. The kingdom, who had not surrendered, will be given the whip. By doing so, we will be sending a message to everyone else. Candy and whip, the people of this world must choose between them. Whoa, things are getting a little more interesting, aren't they, Ainz-sama?